Well, good afternoon. My name's Peter Ferguson. Being as it's the start of August, I think it's time we start talking about snapper in Melbourne. Predominantly today I'm going to cover off Western Port. It's now the time of the year to start looking for snapper. Some people still think it's a bit early, but trust me, they're there. Just take a bit more effort. So this is a map of Western Port. I will give you some pointers on this map as we go through this presentation. So sit down, get comfortable. We're planning on going for about 20, maybe 30 minutes to give an in-depth on Western Port. So what we've got for you here today, first thing we're going to talk about is rigging. There's two main types of rigs people use for Western Port. One is your traditional, what we call a Western Port rig, a running rig, where you have an easy dropper there, an easy rig with a dropper of about 300 mil to hold your sinker. Then you normally run about 1.2 meters of 60 pound mono, down to, of course, a Gamakatsu offset circle. That's the octopus circle I use. Some people like inlines. I do like the octopus circle. I use predominantly 7/0s and 8/0s as I'm chasing the bigger fish, but a 6/0 circle will do the job quite nicely on most snapper. So that's your traditional rig. So about 1.2 meters, simply a uni knot, 1.2, your dropper here, easy rig to slide up and down your leader, and a dropper off that of about 300 mil with a little eyelet on the bottom so you can change your sinkers as the tide progresses. So that's your traditional rig. I personally haven't used that rig now for nearly 3 years. I don't like it. It does catch a lot of snapper, etc., no doubt, but you do catch a lot of bycatch of banjos and stingrays. I would rather not catch as many fish than catch too many of those flatfish all day long. The other rig which I predominantly use is just the old single paternoster. So at the bottom, got a loop, come up about 300 mil, a small dropper loop off here with a 7/0 or 8/0 Gamakatsu offset circle. Once again, I run a bit of Lumo sleeve here for bite protection so the fish can't bite through the mono, and also a bit of attraction. I then come up about another 250 mil to my swivel. That's as simple as that gets. Now, if you want to know how to tie those rigs, go check out my Facebook page, Fishing with Peter Ferguson. In my video section, there is tutorials on how to tie all those rigs. So I won't go too much into that. The one we want to cover probably next is bait presentation. And this is your biggest one in a tidal estuary like Western Port. The tide runs quite quickly, 2 to 4 knots. You need to make sure that your baits are not spinning. And by that I mean test them. Put them over the side of the boat, into the water, ideally about 600 to 800 mil under the water where you can still see them. And make sure that bait is sitting in the current, pulsing, not tumbling. If it looks like it's going to spin at all, pull it out, adjust the hook position, and make sure it does not spin. That is your really big one, okay? Make sure it doesn't spin, whether that's a chunk bait, a squid ring, a squid strip, whatever you are using. Always test your baits before you cast them out there. It's no good having that bait sitting in the water for 20, 30, 40 minutes before you've checked it and it's spinning, looking not natural, okay? So make sure your baits are always sitting dead straight on that hook and no, just pulsing, no tumbling, okay? Excuse me 1 sec. So that's your main two things to start with. So your rigging and your bait presentation. Your bait presentation is probably the biggest thing why a lot of people will never catch big snapper in their fishing time. Mainly because the bigger snapper is a bit smarter than the little pinky. He's been around a lot longer. They don't get to be 20 or 30 year old by being stupid. So make sure that bait looks right in the water all the time. The third rigging that I didn't cover just then is early season, which is now in this August through to say October, when that water temperature is sitting between say 10 degrees and 15 degrees. I would use a pair of snelled 4/0s, sometimes 5/0 suicide hooks. It's the only time I predominantly use a non-circle hook on snapper is very early season when the fish can be very finicky in that cold water. Their bites can be very small and very timid, and you want every opportunity for them to grab. So I'll run a pair of snelled 4/0 hooks, normally probably snelled about 80 mil apart. So one in the top of my bait, one 3/4 of the way down on my bait. Make sure there is a loop of line between those two hooks, that it's not tight or it will make your bait spin. All right? So make sure that's another option to do early season. Often the fish in this colder water will bite like a flathead. All you will see on your rod is, and it will look like a flatty. And I will pick up the rod and lift into anything I see early season, because there's every chance that is a snapper sitting there just nipping away at the bait, okay? So be very conscious of that. So rigging, pretty simple. As I said, go to my Facebook page, Fishing with Peter Ferguson. It's all there how to tie this, guy, so I won't spend too much time on that. Outfits, pretty simple. You can get away with fishing with a 2,500 for snapper most days. You can get away with light gear, 2 to 4, 6 kilo rods any day. However, in Western Port, predominantly there, you're fishing bigger sinkers. So you'll be fishing anywhere between sort of 4 ounces through to 12 to 16 ounces, depending on where you're fishing. And also our bycatch there is a lot different to say Port Phillip, where you'll get every chance of encountering a 20 kilo gummy, a big 7-gill shark up to 60, 80 kilos, bronzies, threshers, plus some monster rays. Now, for that reason alone, I always fish a bit heavier. Now, the gear that I use in Western Port, I will fish predominantly either an 8 or a 10,000 reel. My choice is this, the Saragossa. It's a great workhorse and they're not too dear. Rod zone. Now, I've tried a lot of different rods over the years. These I'm very happy with. These are the Atomic Arrows. This is the offshore series. It's a 20 to 40 pound rated rod. It will easily handle 14 and 16 ounce leads, but it's very comfortable with a 4 ounce lead as well. They're very light to use. They balance up beautifully with an 8 or a 10,000 size reel. And guys, they're not going to break your bank. They're about $179 retail. So they're not going to cost you a fortune. So that whole outfit here is pretty much around the $550, $560. So on here, I run 30 pound braid, 20 pounds fine. My choice is 30 because I tend to use my same outfits for a lot of species. So that one rod and reel will not just do snapper, it will catch me plenty of big gummies, 15 and 20 kilo gummies. It will catch me kingfish, it'll catch me bluefin tuna in that sort of 10 to 15, 20 kilos comfortably. So don't need to go and buy a lot of outfits, buy quality, and the Atomic Arrows offshores are certainly doing the job. All right, that's pretty much what I run for rigs. I will run a spread of between 4 and 6 rods, depending on if I'm fishing alone or with a mate. The main reason why I only fish 4, even with a mate, is just to keep that spread nicely in the current, because the current will drag your sinkers around. So if you're fishing too many rods, you're just going to end up with tangles, guys. Especially if you pick up an eel ray, then you're going to have all sorts of mess everywhere. Okay. Next thing I want to cover off a little bit is bait. Obviously, fresh is best. You cannot beat fresh bait. Something you've caught yourself that day will always outfish something from the tackle shop freezer, or particularly a servo freezer. Servo freezer bait is pretty much good enough for burley, and that's about it. So in Western Port, the #1 bait of choice for snapper is always squid. Calamari is very hard to beat. I know a lot of guys like to eat it. It is also a bloody good bait. And with those baits, you can use multiple there. Out of the heads, you'll get somewhere between 2 and 4 baits. If it's a bigger squid, cut the head down the middle, cut the longer shooter tentacles off. They will make baits on their own. Then squid rings are brilliant. We've seen those in most of our videos around the years and shouldn't have to explain them too much. But if you're in doubt, once again, go to my page. You'll see some pictures and videos there. Squid rings I will keep predominantly about probably 15, 20 mil wide, and just whatever the diameter of the squid is, with a single circle hook just lightly pinned through the top of that, so you've got plenty of gape. When you're fishing a circle, always make sure there is plenty of gape showing. You do not want your bait blocking up that hook so that it can't turn, or it will not work and grab in the corner of the mouth. #1 problem most guys do with their circles is they bury them in the bait. Even a big chunk bait, a big piece of salmon, is only lightly pinned through the skin, just hanging off that so that the hook can freely move. Okay, So squid is my number one bait of choice. They're predominantly spread throughout the whole of the port. They're reasonably easy to catch once you get your game on them a bit. And if you're not great at catching squid, certainly practice and get better at it. Fresh trevally is very good. Yakka is a very good bait, same as slimy mackerel. Both of those are relatively easy to catch around any of the piers in Western Port. And in the early season, excuse me, particularly around this time of the year, in early August into September, there's a lot of cooter in the bay. Don't be afraid to use some cooter. You can catch it there, bit of pilchard on your hook, a couple of metres off the bottom near slack water, or normally catch a couple of cooter. And either use that as a chunk bait or as a strip bait. Anywhere around probably 100 mil long, 15 to 20 mil wide, with one or two hooks hanging through that. Very good bait and all current out there for early snapper. So that's a very good bait for you. So strips, squid strips, if you're using them, they're very good, where you've actually opened them up to being anywhere between sort of 4 and 8 inches long. They're ideally with a pair of snelled hooks. So you've got one at the top as your keeper and one halfway down. Once again, make sure the line between your two hooks is slack. There is a bit of a belly in that line so that it's not going to make your bait spin. With your bait, always, as I said, spend the time beforehand. If you've got the time, catch it that day. If not, there's nothing wrong with going past your seafood shop, picking up a couple of yakkas and something that's fairly fresh. Make sure it looks good. If you wouldn't eat it, don't put it on a hook for a big snapper. And squid does freeze very well, particularly if you've either got a cryovac machine or simply in a Ziploc bag, squeeze all the air out of it, look after them, freeze them, and they defrost very well and will catch a lot of snapper. If you do get stuck, the California squid that you buy in the little cardboard boxes can be an excellent bait. Rip all the outside wings, etc. off, take the head out of it as one bait, and then on one of those, particularly if you put a pilchard or a silver whiting up inside that, we call that a cock and a sock, and then put one circle at the top in the warmer water or a pair of suicides in it early season. That is a very, very good bait and will account for a lot of snapper and gummy sharks. Okay, now what I want to do, guys, I want to move on to covering off the map. Hopefully you can all see this, but at the end of the day, that is a map of Western Port, and it will make sense as I work my way around it. Early season, particularly now around the start of August, right through to about middle to end of October, a lot of your best snapper fishing is going to be concentrated in around 2 to 3 different spots. This area here in Coronella, right through Coronella here, up to Spit Point, right up into these fingers, this whole area, early season, holds the bulk of the snapper. Our theory is that they will come in through the east arm and they will move their ways up into here, and this is where they will spend most of their time. And also up in this top end of Western Port, up here around Bolton's, Boychar, Charing Cross, Lyles, etc. This holds a lot of snapper early season, and those same schools are most likely coming up over the top of the mud here in the high tide and being up here. So your mate will catch them here today. The next day, the same school could be back down here, okay? They do move around. This water, a couple of theories why they're there early season. Probably the top two is it is a bit warmer, it is shallower. So you've got all these mud banks that expose at low tide, so they absorb the warmth from the sun. You get a day like today here in Melbourne, it's about 14 degrees. It's warming that mud up. So when that tide then creeps up into that mud, that water will warm, and it will often be 1 or 2 degrees warmer up in these top channels and here than it will be in the North Arm, and particularly off Cowes. The second theory is also the nutrients. A lot of nutrients running in through these rivers here, up from the Bunyip River, the Lang Lang River, etc. Bringing a lot of nutrients into this water, attracting bait and little crustaceans and crabs, providing ample food source for the snapper. All right, so early season, if I was going to go out in the next few weeks in August and early September and want to maximize my chance, I would be fishing somewhere in this Coronella area here, or I'd be fishing from Joe's through to the top of Bolton's, any of these channels around the back of Joe's, etc. Have a sound, find yourself 1 or 2 marks on your sounder that look like snapper, a couple of arches, and sit and be prepared to spend the whole tide. When the water is in that sort of 10 through to 14, 15 degrees, those snapper have a very small bite window. They're not using a lot of energy, so they're not eating a lot. So you might sound fish, say here at spit point, and you might sit the whole tide there, and you might get a bite time that's 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so don't be afraid to spend the whole tide in one spot, sitting on fish in an area that you're found. Just be there, waiting for them to come on the tube. All right, don't be moving around, running all over the bay. I haven't got a bite in 20 minutes, moving here, moving there. All you're doing is burning fuel, and when the fish have come on the tube up here, or wherever they were, you've left. Okay, so just have a quick drink. So that's your early season. This is where most of your fish will be. Then as the water warms, and sort of around 15 degrees upwards is pretty much peak of snapper season. 15 through to 18 degrees is where the snapper will be the most active and feeding the most aggressively. And you'll find those fish now in that warmer temperature spread throughout the North Arm, pretty much here from Hastings, from Stony Point here, right up through this North Arm, both up through inside, right up through here. Around Crawfish Rock can be very good in that sort of October-ish area, October, November, right through. Now those fish will be swimming with the tide, and the same school that you've caught here at the start of the flood, you're most likely catching up here as they're moving with the tide as the tide progresses to the top. But the fish will be spread out. And once that water has warmed up and it is above that sort of 15 degrees, I will give a spot an hour. If I've sounded fish, say here at buoy 31, for example, and I've sat on those fish for an hour and I haven't got a bite, I will pull the anchor and I will move. And it might only be moving 300 meters. It might be moving 5 Ks. I will move until I find a school of snapper that are actively towards the bottom. If they're down, the arches are very close to the mud or hard up against the mud and the reef, that's telling you they're actively feeding on the bottom. So that's where in that October, November, particularly half an hour in a spot, move. Find the fish that are actively feeding and just keep yourself moving through the bay. So early season recap. In these areas here is your most chance of catching a snapper. And you will get plenty of small gummies in that sort of probably 3 to 6 kilo as bycatch with the occasional big gummy in there, but a lot of small ones. Once the water has warmed up, as I said, we're moving more the North Arm right up through here. This whole area will fish very good through October through to November. Same as this area here. When you're getting more into your November period, your corals. This here, a little bit of a spawning area, I think. This is quite shallow. It's on average only about 4.5 to 6 meters. Fish will graze in here. Just because you might only sound one arch, your cone on your sounder's transducer might only be picking up literally the width of your boat because you're only 4 meters, 5 meters of water. So you might only sound 1 or 2 single arches, anchor, and even throw a few pilchard cubes around. Those fish will be grazing this area. And you might have a mate fishing half a K from you. He'll get 2 or 3 fish. 20 minutes later, you get 2 or 3 fish. Then he gets another few and you get a few more. The fish graze this area. They're chewing on a lot of the shell in there, and often their guts is full of just black mud and shell. This is very good through here. In tradition of what was our tea tree time of the year, that November-ish, can be very good up in here, and particularly at night, the fish will actively be feeding through here in the dark. As we get into late season, so later November, even into December, this area across the front of Rill, Observation Point and Cowes, fires very well. You will find 80 to 100 boats anchored in here on a weekend. Predominantly in about 15 to 17 metres of water through here. Does very well in that later snapper season, okay? The North Arm is really pretty much a grazing area. Used to always be known as the runway because the fish would pretty much run up and down this reef. And it varies between sort of 8 and 16 metres of water where most of your fishing is done in there. But the fish will just cruise up and down with the tide, and you'll often get 2 or 3 fish, then nothing. And an hour later, you get another 2 or 3 as another school comes through. All right, so later season, November-ish up in here, November, December across the front here is very good. Both sides right up along here. right along here to Elizabeth Island, very good snapper fishery. Okay, a few fish do get caught down here in the western entrance by people chasing gummies. It's not predominantly known for it as a place to hunt, but it is deep, it is fast, it's hard to fish, and you get a very short window. So they're your main key locations for chasing snapper in Western Port, everybody. So that covers that. So quick recap, I said early season here, middle season, pretty much this whole area still, but the North Arm comes into its own in that sort of late October, November. From Stony Point through to Joe's fishes very well. Crawfish Rock, the top of the North Arm. Joe's, right up here into Bolton's, and that fishes very well, particularly in a flood tide. Coronella, very good as well. So that covers most of those. I've got a couple of minutes left here. Bait, a few good areas to catch your bait. Your squid, predominantly any of these banks on the North Arm. Both sides here on those weed banks always hold squid. Very good for squid. Right along the top here, the quail bank, right down Tyab bank, right down along the front of Stony, very good. Tortoise head holds a lot of very good squid. So does right across the front of Cowes. Over here, just in this little area here, Reef Island and that, you've got some quite good squid there. Can be quite dirty water, but it does quite good. And along Coronet Bay, there's quite a few little weed beds here that hold some squid. If you want to catch your yakkers and stuff, you've got your main piers along the front up through here along Lysarts. Just be very conscious of the exclusion zones. You are meant to be 100 metres back. There is yellow markers that are your indicators. Make sure you do stay back from those. People have been fined for fishing in too close. They will take your registration and they will report you to the water police. So do the right thing. You don't need to be too close anyway. If you anchor up in that 100 metre zone and put a burley pot down, you'll attract the yakkers and the cooter and everything back to your boat. So all these piers along here do hold good baits there. King George whiting, I know this is sacrilege to a lot of people. If you catch a couple of King George whiting while you're fishing in these areas, don't be afraid to cut one up for bait. They are excellent bait for a good snapper. Okay, so quick recap, I guess, guys. Gear, I'm using Atomic Arrow offshores, 20 to 40 pound. Its model number even is an AAS 70X. Any of your good tackle shops will have those. They're very good. Saragossa 10,000 there is my choice of reel, 30 pound braid. Can't go wrong, guys. Pretty easy. I said 550, 570 for the whole outfit, 600 bucks worst case. It's a pretty good value and it will catch nearly everything you're going to catch out here. You'll get nice little bronzies on that. You'll get small threshers. You'll definitely land kingfish on it. You'll get big gummies. I've landed many gummies around that 20 kilos plus on that outfit. Tuna, I've had tuna to 20 kilos comfortably on those rods. It'll do everything you want to do. All right, so that's about 25 minutes. I hope that gives you a good idea. Any questions, feel free to just go to my page if you need to. Send me a message or put a comment on the end of these videos and I'll do my best to answer that for you. Thank you very much. Hope that's helped everybody.